So, good afternoon everyone, thanks for coming. Thanks for coming this holiday week, which is even harder. What I want to present today are the preliminary results of one of the projects I'm leading, which is about shadow economies in the former Soviet Union. But the original plan when I applied was to present the results and just to give you the numbers and the overviews. And we had a problem during data collection that actually came up. I mean, usually you sometimes have the most interesting discoveries by chance, by mistake, by just incidentally. So I came across this issue, and that was the excuse for me to test this presentation with you and explaining what went wrong. I mean, nothing went wrong, but it's just there was a disagreement. There were tensions within the data collection team, and that would be something useful to understand something different. So it's basically what I'm going to tell you the story of a clash between the economist team and the social science team. So when everybody thinks that the other one was not doing things the way they should, but actually it's just it might just be a different perspective on things. So I just have to mention that this research, of course, was funded under the Horizon 2020 program, and it's called Shadow, an exploration of native informal economies and shadow practice in the former Soviet Union. So what we are trying to do is, Shadow is funded under Marie Curie-Reise, which is a scheme. It is officially about research, but the core of the project is exchange of researchers. So you go somewhere, you spend a time visiting a certain university or a certain partner that could also be from the private sector, and then you do some research, but you also get some experience. And that's a chance for researchers sometimes to experience either a different environment, so it could be just another university, but another university we all do it. I mean, we have Erasmus, we have mobility here and there. In this case, and what I find more interesting is you have a chance to explore a different sector. So most of the people that go from our universities, they go and they work in companies, in research companies. So they see how research skills can be used beyond academia. By doing this, we also completed data collection we almost completed data collection in 5 former USSR countries, of which 2 reports are available. 1 report receiving, I have the data, but I don't have the report. The 3 countries are Ukraine, Georgia, and Kyrgyzstan. And we're still waiting for Russia and Uzbekistan. And then for the next project that we have here with Aleksanteri, we're going to also add Kazakhstan and Belarus. So, why we have to measure the informal economy? There are many ways, and there are many reasons, and the mainstream reason is so we can just get the economy right, in principle. But in my view, okay, sorry for the small letters, but it provides an understanding of how strong the measures should be. Because think about, in public policy, what happens is that, in my view, you can do anything in a country. It's not a matter of if you can do it, it's a matter of how much it costs. So you can convince all the Finns that they should speak German every day. You can manage. But the question is, how much would it cost and what benefits it will bring? And so it's about, like, I call it the metro ticket principle, which is if you're in a country where 80%, 90% of the people are paying for the metro ticket, and they're customary, does it make sense to have ticket inspectors to increase the level of compliance? Because increasing from 90% to 100% means that you have to check every single passenger. But how much more money are you going to make this way, and how much you're spending in inspectors? So again, if you can live with this, you just go on. So the question is, if you understand that the informal economy is there, the informal economy is there anyway. The question is to what extent, how strong it is, how embedded it is, how deep it is. And also the informal economy, the economy sounds like easy to understand. The economy is composed of so many different components that you cannot possibly target all of them. So you have the informal economy, okay, but which sectors are mostly affected? which areas of life, which regions. Maybe in some places they're just the regions that are, in some regions they are kind of very, very compliant, and in some regions they are not. And this is already the social science that come out, is I regard informal economy and compliance with instructions as a way, as attitude of a country towards the state, of a citizens towards the state. So the more the people expect an interaction with the state, the more I would assume that they are happy to comply with state rules. The more they find those rules kind of senseless, they don't understand the advantage, the more I would expect them just to say, I do it my way, as much as I can. And this is also, I mean, this is coming from observation of many different realities. Like, for instance, in India, Gill was saying that corruption is nothing else but the friction between the international ethos that says you have to behave this way and the local one. So once you have a friction between the way citizens are supposed to behave and the way they want to behave, then you have a kind of a gap between how things should be and things are. So shadow transactions, they can be regarded for me as a kind of deviation from state instructions. The state says, we want to give you, you have to pay so we can get money for the hospitals, for the streets, for the roads, and for whatever. And the citizen might say, we don't trust you. We don't think that the money is going anywhere. Oh, I don't want to pay. I think I'm already paying too much. There was a video released by the Romanian tax inspection authorities explaining how good it is to pay taxes, because then if you pay taxes, your roads are going to look like Western roads, and then the hospitals are going to look like Western hospitals. And there were at least two parodies of this video. One was saying, wow, you have to pay for the taxes, so our politicians can go to Austria and they can get to the Austrian hospitals, and they can also use they use Austrian roads. And the second video was showing the reality of roads in Romania and the reality of hospitals in Romania, and they were not really looking like the ones in the video that was released. So in that case, one of the conclusions was that there was not really trust that the money paid would really go into hospitals. So my point is, there are not bad people. If 50–60% of the population, or even 30–40% of us do not comply with state instruction, it's not because they are bad people. I mean, in sociology, you have deviation from standard behavior. In public policy, you have refusal to comply. But the point is, when the majority of the population does it, the problem is not that the people are the bad people. You should ask yourself, do the policy meet the people's expectation, and how people build their own expectations? So to me, informal economy, which is something which has been dealt with by mostly economists and developing economists, is a public policy problem. It's an issue about, if I want to develop a country, am I doing what the citizens are expecting? And if the citizens are not expecting this, it is because their expectations do not meet what I want to give, because there is not enough trust in the state. What are the reasons? So it's a moment of reflection. It's not just about we should kill all those companies that are kind of working in the shadow. It is about we should try to understand how it works, why this is happening. And we also know that punitive measures are much more expensive than kind of inviting the business out of the shadow. Because kind of chasing all the businesses and say you have to close down and applying fines is going to have a much higher cost than simply telling the people, okay, you've been doing this for many years, now can we just get it right, and can you just come out of the shadow? And then we might have to pay a fine, but from now on we can just increase compliance with state rules. So that's the assumption behind. Now, the project is in the economic panel, which means that my social science views, they go into a second level, if you want, because the main point is to understand the level, is to calculate the index of shadow economy. To do this, we use the methods of one of the persons involved, which is Arne Sauka, who is Mr. Informal Economy in the Baltics, and he has published his methodology in the Journal of Comparative Economics. So the methodology we're using has been used in Latvia since 2009, and then it's been expanded to Lithuania and Estonia, and it's happening every year. So every year they do the data collection for the past 2 years, and then they present it at a conference, usually in May in Riga, and it's a big conference. You have media, you have politicians coming, because they're interested in what shall we do. I mean, usually the conference, like the first part is about informal economy, and then the second part transforms into a political debate if there are elections or political events, so everybody's kind of bringing forward the agenda. But the starting point is, what is the level of informal economies in Latvia and in the Baltics, and why so? So what are the sectors that are most affected? What are the ways? So the informal economies for Arne in Arne's method is, you have underreported income, underreported wages, so envelope wages, and you also have underreported. You don't declare the income, you don't declare the wage, you don't declare the workers. So you have workers working there, just not being listed they do it on the phone, and it's in the Baltics, it's 500 interviews, and they use Orbis, or in other cases, they use the company data, the national company database, and then they stratify and they select companies according to the composition of the economy. The idea is about, doing on the phone, which is faster, easier, and they use a gradual approach, so they try to start with less sensitive question, and they frame it in a kind of satisfaction with the taxation environment. And they start to build a sort of rapport with interviewed before they start asking more sensitive questions. Now, what has happened during data collection is that most of the data were fine. So if you look at this is not really shadow, I put it in the shadow, it's the index calculated by Arnes this year, so it's his project. And then applying the same methodology, we had Ukraine, that is almost at 50%. We have Kyrgyzstan, which is at 29%, but it's possible it's going, this is a preliminary result. Ukraine should be definitive, Kyrgyzstan is preliminary, and Georgia came up at 27%. So Ukraine is easy, and it's more or less what you would expect. It's very high. We presented this in a press conference a few days ago, and it went out as official. Kyrgyzstan, we are still working on the data, and Georgia is more or less finalized, but it's finalized after a few discussions. So the few discussions were coming from the fact that there are many methods to calculate or to estimate informal economy, and Arnes is using a direct method, so it's like is an inductive one. They are just asking questions. You also have indirect methods, which is calculation on the basis of a number of indicators, and the most famous, in our understanding, is Schneider, who is an emeritus professor in Austria, and he used indirect methods approach, and he has which allows him to calculate those index for the whole world. Basically, it takes a few days, a few weeks, and then after he processes the data, he has data. So Schneider was calculating for Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, more or less, we are a bit there. Ukraine, we're also there. For Georgia and Kyrgyzstan, we have no data from Schneider from 2017 and 2018. So we can rely just on those, on the 2005-2015 period, which in average gives us those numbers. Now, as you will see, Schneider contends that it's 64. I would guess even calculation now would be a bit lower because the times have changed. 2005, 2015, it was a very special period for Georgia because it was the very reform. So the informal economy was strong, and then it was, Saakashvili was trying to repress it quite strongly. And this is why they introduced online registration for companies. They were introducing all kind of facilitation, which kind of decreased the level of informal economy. Kyrgyzstan, same thing. It's updated to, I mean, the last measurement was in 2015. But the problem is, and here you have national statistics that, of course, I mean, they are lower for a number of reasons. Now, the problem with Georgia was that when you have the starting number and then you see 27, it's like, okay, it's less than half. How is it this possible? And this is even more interesting if you look at the way the responses were given. So those are the three, I mean, they're different graphs because, I mean, the representation is different because three different kind of institutions were collecting the data. But the information is the same. It is, what is the level of informal economy, I mean, of shadow economy in your country, measured on the GDP of the companies of different size. So you have, okay, just for some reason I got copied the wrong one, but those two are, the company is, yeah, I mean, this is, I don't know why the numbers came out this way, but this is a very, very, it goes from small companies, which is 1 to 5 employees, then the second line is 10 employees, and then it's over and over and over. And you will see that in Georgia, I mean, the number of micro companies that is not underreporting anything seems to be 55%. So the data are, everyone is hiding something. And usually what you would expect is bigger companies, they do not hide that much. Because there are a few big companies, they're under scrutiny, and they have other ways of hiding things. I mean, if you're talking of hiding just as a way to hide things under the bed, is one thing. But if you're talking of hiding the money just like sending it to another country and get losses, then you should take into account Apple, you should take into account Amazon, and all the accounts they have here and there. So usually there is no underreporting for big companies because they know how to do it, and whenever they try, they are more under control from national authorities because they are the big ones. Whereas the small ones, you never know what they are. You never know what's going on. But what was surprising in the Georgian case was that the majority of the smaller companies, they say, no, we're not hiding anything. I mean, in terms of responses. And then you say, okay, so why everybody's so honest in Georgia? I mean, and then of course what happens is, yeah, also in this case, I mean, we're not hiding anything. And then of course what happens is that, on the one hand, economically this doesn't make any sense because you have a certain number that's been going, it's been very constant for regular for many years, and then one day we wake up and there is, the informal economy is kind of half, it's been halved. So the economic side will say, well, there's something wrong with the way the survey has been implemented. The sociologists will say, well, there's something wrong with the methodology of the survey, because if you're not getting the results you were expecting, maybe you're not, I mean, the initial instructions were not the right ones. And this is just to share a few more data. This is how the survey is done. Okay, so now we have the shadow economy. This is okay. This is the companies and the size of the company. We don't have the turnover, also because some of the respondents will not give you the turnover. But at the same time, we can estimate that smaller companies, they have a lower turnover. Of course, I was talking to the Georgians, and they would say, yeah, but there were some companies have no employees, but they have very high turnout. But statistically, there could be 1, 2, 5 companies. They kind of have one person employed, and they are super successful, and they make lots of money. But usually, if you employ from 1 to 5 people, it's because you have a small turnover. What we have also, which is very specific for Georgia, is that the majority of the shadow economy and even of the industry is in Tbilisi. I mean, Tbilisi, the size of the city and the size of the economy of the city compared to the rest of the country is very, very significant. So you would expect more things to be there. And of course, the other one, the other two industrial regions, which is Agraria and Internet. And that one is how the shadow economy is divided in the national sector. So you have construction. Of course, construction is the best way for money laundering, so it's always going to be there. You have services, which is very small, it's relatively small, retail, wholesale, and production. I mean, production of, factory and production. That could also be they produce 2,000 shoes and they report only 1,000 shoes, which is the easiest way to get around. Now, with this kind of tension between teams, we sat down reflecting with the Georgians what could have gone wrong. Do we have the wrong survey? Do we have the wrong methodology? Do we have the wrong people? And my understanding is a mixture. I mean, I don't have the definitive answer, but I have a few answers that I have been collecting. So, taxation in Georgia is different from the rest of the region, because taxation is done mostly online, and company registration is very fast. So there is and also the other thing is that in Georgia, micro companies that earn up to 30,000 lari per year, I mean the income, they don't pay taxes. So there is no reason to underreport. I mean, there is a reason to underreport the employees because they pay tax, they pay social security taxes, but in terms of income, they don't pay. And income up to 500,000 lari is taxed at 1%. So if you look at the risk that you have in not declaring things and the amount of money you have to pay, rational choice would kind of expect you to pay, because it's 1%, but if they catch you, it's the end. Also because many respondents were, some of the questions of the survey were about how probable, I mean, how likely is that they're going to catch you, and if they catch you, what's going to happen? Do you have to close, or is nothing is going to happen? Then there was something very, very specific that I could not imagine. Now, we've been doing this survey in other places. And what you usually do is you ask for a projection, for a perception of the shadow economy in the sector. So you don't say, you're not going to ask how much you're hiding. You say, in your sector, so you are in construction, how much you think people in average tend to hide? And then of course, when you do a projection, you do a projection on what you're doing. So this method has been used in Ukraine since '97. It's been used in other settings, so we try to be. But what was coming out is that in Georgia, people might simply be more afraid. I mean, the Georgian respondent will say they wouldn't. I understand them. They would be afraid because under Saakashvili there was such a repression on business, and business was so much under scrutiny that some people might be more reluctant than in other cases. Whereas we didn't have any problems in Ukraine. People would be more. Perhaps also you have the fact that Georgia is smaller. I mean, Tbilisi is smaller, so everybody knows everyone. So in the end, if you say something, it might come out. Whereas in a place which is bigger, like when I was doing informal economy in Istanbul, in Turkey, they would say Istanbul is the place where most of the informal economy is concentrated because it is so big that you don't know how many companies you have here. You don't know who is here. You don't know what is happening here. So if you need to hide something in Turkey, you hide it in Istanbul, not in other places. Whereas in Georgia, I mean, Tbilisi is the capital, but it's not this huge metropolis. It's more or less a kind of balanced city. It's not the biggest city of the possible. So it's more difficult to hide things. So this could be one thing. The other one is what I was mentioning as non-monetary practice. So this is the model that Arnes is using about the observed economy and the non-observed economy. So what we are not able to understand with the survey, because our sample are registered companies, whenever there are companies that are not registered, we cannot reach them. Now, the assumption is that non-registered companies, they cannot bring so much damage to the economy. But in case there are companies that are not registered, you have this thing. And the other thing is that the survey doesn't take into account sufficiently non-monetary practices. So if I pay you to get something done, it is one thing. But like for instance, in Georgia, you have the practice of being very, very close from childhood. And if we are exchanging favors, which in Russia is blood, but in Georgia is birja, and if I know that I'm going to get a favor from you and you're going to get a favor from me, they're not going to pop up there because there is no money involved. So you're not taking into account the non-monetary. That could be economic still. Component of the economy. So what we have now for the moment is that, as we can see, shadow economy occupies anyway a significant part, even if we cannot measure the we are not measuring in Georgia, we've done in Ukraine, the non-monetary component. And of course, it's not capable of appreciating the whole complexity of the economy. So we have some indicators, but we also, if you stick to economic indicators, means that anyone who is kind of exchanging favors, and those favors could be very significant, we don't necessarily know about them. But a significant amount of people, that's from the survey, I didn't put the slide, but they are afraid of getting caught and they are afraid of the consequences. Which means, I don't agree, I do it but I'm afraid, and I know that I'm afraid that if it happens, it's going to be very, very bad. To me, there is a margin for reform, because if you convince those people, they are already half convinced, because they are convinced by, if you just give them the alternative and say, you're risking a lot. We can find a way to decrease your risk and to incentivize to pay you less, and understanding why you're not paying, it is important to understand then how we can motivate those people. But in principle, if people are doing this and they don't feel like very confident that nothing is going to happen, but they are afraid, there is a margin for convincing people into getting out of the shadow. The question is how. The question is, what are the costs that you have to reduce for them to come out? It could simply be lower taxation sometimes. But I'm not going to say this is the result, but say lower taxation. Sometimes it is just that in De Soto in Peru was showing that it was difficult to have the money to register a company. You would have to pay so much money, and you don't have this capital. So they would prefer to bribe the people all the time rather than paying upfront like 2,000. That could be kind of easing up registration procedures. There are many other things. So we are just at the beginning of, we have collected the data and now we are processing them. But some of the challenges are, for instance, that the shadow economy sometimes, I was reading this morning an article and it was like, oh, the informal economy, the shadow economy is here, and then corruption, and then criminal flows. The shadow economy sometimes has something to do with the corruption and has something to do with criminal flows, but they're not the same thing. Somebody underreporting income to avoid taxation is not the same thing as somebody selling drugs on the black market. It is not the same thing as somebody paying a politician to get a law approved to be able to do whatever they want, or to paying tax inspectors, or to paying kind of safety, sanitary inspection or whatever inspection you want, just not to comply with what they want. So I find there is a high degree of confusion, and you think that attacking the informal economy is just going to get things right and going to get things straight. It is not the case. The informal economy is just one of the problems that you have of the underground economy, and it's what you can observe. But there is much more. So the question is, shall we attack all at once, or we should just try to target sector by sector or problem by problem, which would allow kind of more targeted measures? Because if you attack and say if you use anti-corruption measures and you apply them too much into the social setting, to give you an example, the definition of corruption of the World Bank in 1998 by Tanzi is basically, if I give something, expect for something. That's a gift. Mao say it's a gift, and you are denying the gift to have a definition of corruption which is as inclusive as possible. But if I give a present to my son and I expect something, gratitude, that goal potentially, theoretically, goes into that definition. So if you try to get this one size fits all, of course it's easier because you have instructions, but there is no evidence that it's going to be effective. And also, as I was saying, it is not that the people are necessarily bad. It could simply be that it is an indicator that there is no trust in institutions. And then you have the chicken and the egg question, because it's, shall we start with having politicians and institutions that are more reliable so that people know that they can trust them? Or shall we educate people to trust the institutions, even if those institutions are not necessarily reliable? Then of course you can try to do both. But the question is, perception is not necessarily reality. And then if you educate people into how you should trust the government, they should also see the thing. And should also understand it in a certain way. Which brings to the other, is the second document here? Yes, it's here. Which brings to the last point. This is an article that I published a few years ago on the basis of survey. The survey was not an economic survey, it was a social survey. So we were looking at connections, how often people use connections to get things done. So we're not looking at money. Connection could also be money, could be like, I know someone, I'm going to give a present to get something back. But if you look at the level of state trust in Ukraine, you will see that it was incredibly low. So the government does what is best for Ukraine. Almost 80% is agreed. And that's the survey, that's a national representative survey. The survey represented the whole country. Local authorities have improved. This is from 3 years ago. So it might have changed, but I don't expect it to have changed that much. I think that the state is acting in my interest? Of course not. And on the other hand, no, that's here. 80% say, yeah, but I think that we should help each other. It is important to have other people that help you and you that help other people. So if all the state trust is going into your community, then of course the morality that you put into your community is not necessarily the morality that the state, the ethics, the moral standard that the state is imposing. So if there is no state trust, if people don't feel the state is protecting them, of course they rely to more kind of on structures that are kind of more familiar to them. And in that case, informal economy or even whatever informal practices can be explained by simply non-compliance. Doesn't mean that we don't want to comply with the state. It means we relate to a different system of values that puts our acquaintances around in a much better position, a much more important position than the state. And as a last thing, the last image, just think if you ever seen them in the newspapers or on TV. When you have somebody, when you have a kind of a criminal or mafia man that gets arrested in southern Italy, and then you have the scene which is very, very kind of colorful. You have the police that goes there, and then you have the whole area, the whole neighborhood. They come out and they want to beat up the police, and they throw oranges and they throw eggs, and you think, oh my God, they're so uncivilized. They don't like the police. But the point is, for those people, the person who's being arrested is the most generous one, because if you need a job, you have to go to that person. If you need money, you need to go to that person. If you have a problem in your family, you have to go to that person. So who is more reliable? Who is closer to those communities? The state or those ones? So if the state is not there, and this is because it doesn't get there, because it doesn't want to get there, it doesn't know to get there, it doesn't know what are the priorities of that population, why people should relate to the state as a first interlocutor, as the first actor for exchange of favors, loyalty, social and political interaction, and why they should prioritize the state if there are other institutions, informal institutions, that are more important and more relevant to their life. So if there is no trust, or if there are no expectations, I don't expect informal economy to to go out and say, yes, of course, we want to pay taxes. No, don't need. Yeah, but we want to pay. Please get the money. And this is something that is not always measurable by economic terms. But we start, of course, from an economic perspective, because the informal economy is something that is the major preoccupation of the informal economy is the taxable income. It's like we don't have enough. It deprives the state of, it kind of undermines state capacity. But that's just, to me, that's just the top of the iceberg. There is much more, and only looking at it from a sociological and economistic perspective, you can try to tackle the thing. Thank you.